My name is Megan, and I'm a 20-year-old university student from Texas. My parents divorced when I was 10, and since then, I've been living with my mom. Last year, I faced one of the most challenging moments of my life. My father passed away after a battle with cancer. We were incredibly close, and his death was a huge blow. In his will, he left me a significant amount of money, but I could only access it once I turned 20. This year, when I finally turned 20, something unexpected and unbelievable happened. My stepdad, Paul, who's in his mid-30s and has been married to my mom for 3 years, called me into his room. We've never had the best relationship, but I've always tried to be polite and civil with him, even though he hasn't always treated me well. During this conversation, Paul brought up the money my dad had left me. He said I should give it to my stepbrother, Charles, because he needed it for his college education. Charles wanted to attend university, just like me, and Paul thought it was only fair that I hand over my inheritance to help him out. I was stunned. I couldn't believe that Paul was actually asking me to give away the money that my father had left specifically for me. I told him, "Paul, I don't think I can do that. This money was left to me by my dad. What if I need it in the future?" But Paul wasn't having it. He dismissed my concerns, saying, "Don't be ridiculous, Megan. You don't need that money, and even if you do, Charles needs it more." I stood my ground and replied firmly, "I'm sorry, but the answer is no." This made Paul angry. He warned me, "Megan, don't push me." Trying to stay calm, I told him, "There's no need to get angry. I'm just being honest. Saying no isn't about disrespecting you. It's about setting boundaries. I'm standing up for myself, and if that makes you mad, then maybe you need to think about your attitude. Remember, Paul, you're a guest in this house too, so let's try to be civil." Before he could say anything else, I walked out. His behavior didn't surprise me at all, given how he's acted in the past. I had a feeling he would eventually try to get his hands on that money. You might be wondering where my mom was during all of this. Well, that's a whole other story. My mom seems to be blind to Paul's flaws and stands by him no matter what, almost like she's under a spell. She loves me, but I've tried not to ruin her perception of him, so I've always done my best to get along with Paul for her sake. It's strange how, despite being one of the youngest in the house, I feel like I have to be the most responsible and level-headed one. I often found myself having to be the most mature person in the house, even though I was the youngest. My mom, Teresa, was out of town during this whole ordeal, which is why she wasn't there to witness it. If she had been, I'm sure she would have been furious with Paul. That's probably why he thought he could push me around while she was away. But what he didn't realize was that I was fully aware of his sneaky intentions. After I walked out of the room, Paul followed me, scolding me and accusing me of being a bad sister because I refused to give the money to Charles. His accusation was far from the truth. I do care about Charles and want to help him, but not by giving up the money my dad left for me. It felt like Paul was just trying to manipulate me into doing what he wanted. When people say, like father, like son, they might as well be talking about Paul and Charles. These two troublemakers reminded me of Pinky and the brain you can decide who's who based on what happened next. As I continued to walk away, Paul shouted after me, "Hey, don't walk away while I'm talking to you. You need to listen and do what's right." I turned back to him and asked, "Can you give me a good reason why I should?" Before he could respond, Charles, who had been woken up by our arguing, joined the conversation. "What's going on with you two? Your arguing woke me up," he said. Paul quickly jumped in. "Charles, tell Megan what we talked about earlier." Charles hesitated for a moment before saying, "Sure. What was it again?" "Oh, right, the inheritance money. Yeah, Megan, Dad, and I were talking, and we need that money for something important." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean for your college tuition?" Paul interrupted, trying to steer the conversation back on track. "Yeah, that's right. It's for your university, Charles." Charles nodded, clearly confused. "Oh, yeah, I completely forgot. I just woke up, you know. Yes, it's for university. I want to attend, and I need the money for myself." I couldn't help but smirk at how poorly rehearsed their act was. Well, that's a cute attempt, but not cute enough. The answer is still no. Charles protested. "Why not, Megan?" I know what I want, and this isn't up for discussion. We're getting that money. We'll see about that, I replied calmly, though the tension in the room was thick. The rest of the evening was filled with awkward silence. Paul was known for his silly pranks and attempts to get under my skin, but this was different. It was a deliberate effort to manipulate me, and I wasn't going to let it slide. As much as I wanted to tell my mom what was happening, I decided to handle the situation on my own for now. I wanted to keep dealing with Paul and Charles directly, especially after I realized how far they were willing to go. Megan, stop playing around. You need to be a grown-up and do the right thing, Paul said, trying to sound authoritative. I couldn't help but scoff. And the right thing is giving away my money? Are you serious, Paul? Just wait until I tell Mom. His reaction was immediate and unexpected. Don't tell Teresa anything, he snapped. Why not? She's my mom. She deserves to know how I'm being treated. Paul's tone shifted to one of false concern. You think she cares? Listen, I'm just trying to help you. If you bring this up to her, she'll only get upset with you for wasting her time and being selfish. I looked him straight in the eye and said, Well, Paul, that's a risk I'm willing to take. His angry tone surprised me as he growled, I'm warning you, don't tell your mother. At that moment, I realized just how desperate and manipulative he was. But I wasn't about to back down. This was my life, my money, and I wasn't going to let anyone, not even Paul, push me around. I had never seen Paul so worked up, especially over something like this. It was clear that something was going on, especially with that business idea Charles accidentally mentioned. They must think I'm not smart enough to catch on, and Paul's strong reaction to me talking to my mom only made me more suspicious. As soon as I could, I went to talk to my mom. Hey, Mom, how are you doing? I'm good, baby. How about you? She replied warmly. Not very well, Mom. Something's off with Paul and Charles, especially Paul. He's acting weirder than usual, I said, trying to sound calm. Oh, Megan, don't be paranoid. I know you don't really like him, but he's not weird, she responded, trying to reassure me. Mom, he asked me for the inheritance money, I said, getting straight to the point.
What?
Really? She asked, surprised. Actually, he demanded the money. Both he and Charles, I clarified, hoping she'd see how serious this was. That's not true. He wouldn't do that, she said, clearly in disbelief. I know you love him, Mom, for whatever reason, but this is true. He said it's for Charles's education, but I think something fishy is going on. He even got pretty aggressive when I told him I'd tell you what he said to me. I explained, trying to make her see the situation from my perspective. I don't know, baby. I just feel like I need more proof, she said, still hesitant. Don't worry, I'll get all the proof you need. Just wait and see, I promised her. Even though my mom wasn't ready to fully believe me yet, I was determined to uncover what was really going on. I kept telling myself that man had put some kind of spell on her. Later that night, I decided to do some digging. I used the family computer and found something shocking. It looked like Paul had forgotten to log out of his email account, his mistake. What I found was more than concerning. Paul had been exchanging emails with a woman named Maria, and they were far from friendly. It looked like he was having an affair. I took careful notes on what I discovered, but what I found next was even more disturbing. The emails discussed Paul divorcing my mom and running away with Maria. They mentioned getting a large sum of money soon for some kind of business, but from what I read, it seemed shady. While Paul wasn't stupid enough to put anything illegal in his emails, he was dumb enough to have an affair and forget to log out of his account. I knew I needed more information, so the next day, I decided to see if I could get anything out of Charles. I made sure to record our conversation on my phone. Hey, Charles, I greeted him casually. Hello, Megan, he replied, sounding unusually cheerful. You seem happy today, I noted, trying to ease into the conversation. Why not? It's a beautiful day, he said, clearly in a good mood. I have some questions for you. I began. I've been thinking about what you and Paul said, and I'm considering giving you the money. Really? That's great. I'll let him know, Charles responded excitedly. Not so fast, I stopped him. Before I give you this money, it is for your college, right? Oh, yeah, right. My college tuition, he stammered, clearly caught off guard. Yes, right, I said, pretending to go along with it. I needed more information, and I could tell Charles was the weak link in their plan. I needed to be sure you were serious about getting this money, I said, my tone firm. Yes, I'm very serious, Charles replied quickly, though I could sense some nervousness. Are you sure? And what about Maria? Is she serious too? I asked, watching his reaction closely. Maria? Who's Maria? Charles stammered, clearly caught off guard. Oh, she's, a student advisor for the college, he quickly added, but I knew something was off. Before I could press further, Paul suddenly walked into the room. The tension immediately skyrocketed. I don't appreciate you interrogating my son, he said, his voice cold. I wasn't interrogating him, I replied, trying to stay calm. I was just asking how my money would be used. Well, once you give someone money, it's not yours anymore, so it's not your business, Paul shot back. Is that any way to speak to someone who's thinking of giving you money? I asked, my patience wearing thin. You're not thinking, you're giving me that money. If you don't, I'll kick you out, Paul threatened. I was stunned, and so was Charles. Dad, this wasn't part of Charles began, but Paul cut him off sharply. Shut up. I'm the parent and I make the rules. If you don't give me that inheritance money, you can leave, Paul barked. I decided to keep quiet, but little did Paul know, I was still recording the entire conversation. I had caught him in the act. Without another word, I walked out of the room, giving Paul an angry look and locked myself in my bedroom. Once inside, I began collecting all the evidence I had against him. It felt like I was one of those detectives on TV, gathering clues and piecing everything together. I had voice recordings, screenshots of Paul's emails with Maria, and every detail I could find. I knew a storm was coming, and I was ready. After organizing everything, I called my mom. Hello, Mom. Hey, love, how are you? She answered. Mom, are you sitting down? I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Why? What's wrong? She asked, immediately concerned. I'm afraid I have some really bad news to share and you won't like it, I said, bracing myself for her reaction. I started telling her everything I had discovered. At first, she was in denial, refusing to believe it. But then I made her listen to the audio recording of Paul's threats. That's when she started to break down. Why would he say those things to you? Why would he do that to me? Why would he be so cruel? She asked, her voice shaking. Because he's a bad man, Mom. I'm sorry to say it, but you married a monster, I replied gently. This is just terrible. I can't believe I left you alone with those two sickos, she said, her voice filled with regret. Absolutely not. I'm coming home right now. You stay where you are. Have you locked your door? She asked urgently. Yes, ma'am, I replied. I'm going to ruin that man and make sure he never shows his face in public again. When I'm done with him, he'll wish he never married me, she vowed. That's the spirit, Mom. Now hurry up and get home. We need to make a plan, I said, feeling a sense of relief knowing she was on her way. My mom arrived several hours later and came straight to my room. We hugged and cried together for what felt like hours. The bond between us had never been stronger, and we both knew that no matter what happened next, we would face it together. I could tell the news was hard for my mom to hear, but I was relieved that she had moved into the anger stage. Her anger fueled her to take action, and that was exactly what we needed. We talked for hours, and by the end of our conversation, we had a solid plan in place. A few days passed, and Paul seemed puzzled by my mom's sudden return from her work trip. He couldn't understand why she was home early, or why she was giving him the cold shoulder. He put on an overly cheerful front, trying too hard to convince her of his innocence. But my mom wasn't fooled. She saw right through his act and was preparing to kick him out. After I showed her the suspicious messages about his so-called business, my mom decided to hire a private investigator. She had a strong suspicion that the money wasn't going to be used for anything legal, and that made her furious. She couldn't comprehend how a parent could be so deceitful and cruel. We both knew this situation was too big for us to handle alone. 5 days later, the private investigator shared his findings with my mom, who then sat me down to tell me everything. I'm speechless, I said, trying to process what she had just told me. Well, it turns out he's planning to use a laundromat for money laundering. It's an old trick, she explained. Wow, that's shocking. But there's more, isn't there? I asked, sensing that the worst was yet to come. Yes, there's more, she continued, her voice filled with disbelief. This woman, Maria, the one he's cheating on me with, has a criminal record. She's been arrested multiple times for drug-related activities. It wouldn't be surprising if their business involves drugs too. That's unbelievable. I never would have expected this. It's like a veil has been lifted from my eyes. The man you married isn't a man at all, he's a sick and twisted person, I said, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. When are we going to confront him, Mom? I asked, ready to take the next step.
Right now.
Follow my lead, she replied, her determination clear. Wait, let me get my camera, I said, grabbing my phone. We walked into the living room and found Charles and Paul deep in conversation, discussing their shady business plans. And then we'll use this as a cover for our business. It's all going to be hidden, just act like you don't know anything and serve the customers, okay?
Paul was saying.
But what about, Charles started to ask, but then they noticed us. Oh, hey everyone, we're just finalizing stuff for Charles's college application, Paul said, trying to play it off. Cut the act, Paul. The game is up. We know everything, my mom said firmly. What do you mean? Paul asked, his smile fading. Your innocent act won't work anymore, I added, holding up my phone. Smile for the camera. Get that out of my face, you spoiled brat, I mean Megan, Paul snapped, his true colors showing. We know everything, Paul. Do you realize how many years you could spend in jail for planning these crimes? My mom asked, her voice cold and resolute. The confrontation was intense, and as Paul's facade crumbled, the reality of his actions began to sink in. My mom and I had the evidence we needed, and there was no way he could talk his way out of this. I don't know what you're talking about, Paul stammered, trying to maintain his composure. Maybe we should call Maria and see what she has to say, I suggested, pushing him further. You two think you know everything, Paul sneered. Maria is just a friend. Well, the explicit photos suggest otherwise, I shot back. Who even uses emails to cheat nowadays? It's so dumb. Paul's face reddened with anger. You went through my things? How dare you? No, Paul. My mom cut in, her voice full of rage. How dare you? How dare you threaten my daughter multiple times, trying to take money that doesn't belong to you? How dare you threaten to kick her out of my house? Are you sick in the head? How dare you involve your son in your foolish schemes, putting him at risk? And how dare you plan to use that money for illegal activities? Now you've got nothing to say, huh? We know everything, and we're going to take you down. Get that camera out of my face, Paul shouted, his voice trembling with fury. He suddenly lunged at me, but I was too quick for him, dodging out of the way. His aggressive behavior was terrifying. You want to attack my daughter? It's like you're asking to go to prison, my mom said, her voice steady despite the situation. You think you know everything, but you know nothing. Yeah, well, tell that to the police, who should be here any second now, I added confidently. Police? Paul's voice faltered. Yes, the police, my mom confirmed. Your behavior today just sealed your fate. At that moment, we heard police sirens approaching. I had never seen Paul look like that before. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a look of pure terror. All the color drained from his face. Please, Teresa, you don't have to do this. I can explain everything, Paul pleaded, his bravado completely gone. Save it for the judge, you cockroach, my mom snapped. You disgust me. And Charles, don't think you're off the hook. Both of you are getting arrested. Maybe this will teach you a lesson about mistreating my daughter and me. I know you're a kid, Charles, but you're old enough to know better, and for that, you need to be punished. Yes, Mom, Charles muttered, looking down. Come on, Rachel. Paul tried one last time. Don't you think this is a bit too much? On the contrary, it's not enough, my mom replied coldly. How's our live stream, Megan? We've got over 2,850 people watching, I said, holding up my phone. This is going to be big. Oh, and in case it wasn't clear, my mom added, her voice dripping with contempt, I want a divorce. That's right, over 2,850 people witnessed the entire mess live, and it didn't take long for the news to spread to local newspapers and tabloids. It was surreal to be in the middle of it all, dealing with my sick ex-stepfather and his son. But in the end, it was incredibly satisfying to see Paul's downfall. He lost everything: his job, his friends, and even some family members who no longer want anything to do with him. He's now facing serious charges for all his schemes, and if the judge decides, he could spend up to 22 years in prison. The police also tracked down Maria, who had been hiding when everything started unraveling. She's facing the same charges as Paul. On our side, life was good. The whole situation brought my mom and me closer together. On weekends, we'd often sit on the patio, drinks in hand, and laugh about how foolish and evil Paul had been. Good riddance, indeed.